So, hello everyone. I hope you can hear me. Yes. Um, my talk today is again on glare, but related to healthy lighting because, as you might know, CIE has released end of last year the new version of the CIE position statement on integrative lighting, recommending proper light at the proper time. And why is this out? Simply to promote healthy lighting, to promote the non-visual effects. And the core topic of it is like the core takeaway is, we had it several times, to achieve at least 250 melanopic EDI at the eye during the daytime. But why I'm talking about this? Well, this morning was also a presentation about this, but there is another statement in this document where basically says we need to be careful when you want to reach the 250 lux, not to have glare. So basically, it mentions or it raises the question: is there a conflict between glare protection that is needed and the recommended levels at the eye? Or on the other hand, is there a conflict between glare and this recommendation? So, shortly about glare. The definition of CIE is basically, to nail it down a little bit, it's either the range of luminance, which means the amount of light that reaches the eye, or extreme contrast. This was found already many years ago in the last century. There were several studies about. Basically, we have the contrast effect. So, for example, if the sun is in the field of view, or the total amount of light effect. Well, we just heard it, and you will see I will have some other thresholds later on. So the amount of light triggers how much glare you perceive. And that was actually also included in the daylight glare probability. By the way, just funny thing, we have the 20 years of the VELUX Symposium, and actually Jens and I, we published exactly 20 years ago the first version of DGP, so it was in the same year, so it's a nice coincidence. Anyway, daylight glare probability is used in several standards, so not only in the many times mentioned 17037, also in two others. And this one has also this amount of light effect in the first part of the equation. And I will not torture you more with equations, it's the only one here. It's just that you know it considers this, and it considers also the contrast effect. So, and then we have in the standards, we have certain thresholds where we come back later on as well. So the core question is there really a conflict of glare with the 250 lux? And no, sorry. I leave out this here, it's too fast. So the core question is at which level EV becomes glare an issue, and that's one point to look at. So first of all, I will give a theoretical analysis simply based on an equation as it is in DGP, but also results of a human subject study that we have published some years ago. And at the end, I will give results of a simulation study that we are currently doing, applying conventional shading systems and to see what is the impact on glare if we control the shadings in a way that we have a good glare protection, how much melanopic EDI do we reach. So based on the glare equation, we do it in two steps. So first of all, we say we have no glare source, it's simply the amount of light. And the second part would be we have a small glare source. So for example, we have a fabric and we can see the sun through the holes that are in there. So we have a large contrast, and then we see what happens. So what you see here is I cannot see this laser. Anyway, this is the curve of basically of DGP as a function of vertical illuminance. If there is no glare source, and what you can see is it hits the line of noticeable glare, which is 0.35 at around 3000 lux. And if we talk about glare that is disturbing, we are roughly about 4000 lux. So what we can generally see, well, the question is, these are thresholds that are in the standard, yeah, but we have in another standard, in the 14501, we also looked at the 0.3. So basically, we can as a takeaway from that curve, we can say below roughly below 2,500 lux, at least from the equation-wise, there should be no issue regarding vertical illuminance. So what if we have a glare source included that is like the sun disk visible? And I've drawn here 3 curves, which means the sun disk has once 100,000 candela per square meter, 500,000 or 1 million, depending on the weaving of the fabric. And this is the theoretical curve of DGP. And what you see here is a very interesting effect, is that the glare is actually decreasing. The glare that we have as a contrast to the sun is decreasing when we increase the vertical illuminance. And by the way, this is not just a theoretical effect. I don't have the slides for this with me, but we had exactly done experiments with the fabric, and we exactly could follow this in the responses of the people when they adjusted the blinds because it was very dark. They lifted it to let the sun in, and then they perceived basically no glare anymore. Yeah, and this is the cause. So why is this like this? It's because the adaptation level is simply increasing, and therefore the DGP goes down. But then again, when do we have more glare? These are these points here, and then here we end up with roughly 2,000 lux or 3,300 lux, depending on which level we are talking about. So this was the theory. Now, I would not say it's practice because it's still based on studies that were all done in laboratories under semi-controlled environments. This was published in Technology. This one had like 340 roughly test persons and around 800 data points. And the big difference to other fields is that the range of stimuli here is much larger. So we don't run into a problem that we miss a certain range, and we can much more reliable extract thresholds. And this is what we did there. So we used, for this analysis here, we used vertical illuminance as a glare metric. And the way how it's derived is based on a rock curve analysis, where I cannot go into detail now, but it's much more reliable because it's more independent on the range of stimuli. And what we get then here is the threshold between imperceptible and noticeable glare, basically what we saw before, is around 2,500 lux. And the borderline between noticeable and disturbing glare is around 3,400 lux. This is very similar than what we had when we only looked at the vertical illuminance before. Conclusion from these first 2 analyses is we have roughly factor 10 between the 250 lux and the glare. Everything below 800 lux, if we can ever see the sun, is actually, when we increase the luminance, actually decreases the glare. So this factor 10 leaves some room for controlling the blinds accordingly. And this is what we did now for the simulation study. I saw 3 minutes, so I have to rush a bit. So we had 3 different locations here. And we looked at 4 different facade systems. So we had externally mounted black fabrics in combination with low E glass, internally mounted white fabric with a solar control glass, and externally mounted Venetian blinds also with a low E glass. And we had electrochromic glass that can change the tinting between 1% and 57%. We had south orientation, and this is now very important. We look now at 3 different controls. So one is shading simply up, never activated, shading always down. So basically the 2 boundaries. And then we had a kind of advanced control. So basically meaning we have a user automatically, when there's glare, lowering the blinds as much that the sun is not hitting the eye anymore. And in summer, there was also a solar control algorithm in there to lower the blinds. So here you see the positions. It was quite close to the facade, the results that we have. And then the separation, this is simply for the simulation. We cannot have it in very fine steps. So we have 4 steps for the height of the fabric or the blinds, and the blinds itself had also only 4 angles. Electrochromic glass was separated in 2 panes, just that you understand what we did. And regarding the metrics, we calculated during the daylight hours the 95th percentile of DGP, similar to the European standard. Important here because we talk about the full year. We defined a melanopic EDI autonomy, which means the percentage of time during the daylight where the vertical illuminance is above the 250 lux. So 90% means 90% of the daylight hours we have more than 250 lux. So what we have as a result, of course, when the shading is never activated, DGP is, we have a lot of glare. We are of 80% of the melanopic EDI. When the shading is always down, of course, the glare is quite low. This is, the shading should work. And here we can see there are huge discrepancies between the shading devices. Takeaway is here, dark fabric and electrochromic glass. If it's always switched, then you have no daylight anymore at the eye level. But if you use actually a fabric that is quite high in transmittance, it was like 12%, then you are still at 70% if you are not too far away from the facade. Yeah, I have to say, this is around, I don't know, 1.5 meters, so it's not too far. And if we have kind of good control, we don't lose much. And this is actually, sorry, I didn't say that, this was for Frankfurt. If you have it for Stockholm, the picture is very similar, and actually for Rome also. So even with a simple fabric, actually, and a control that works properly, we can have glare and melanopic EDI more or less aligned. It's different if you have deep rooms for sure, and we will evaluate this as well, together also with all the thermal aspects, because we have the solar control also. So these are the limitations. So the takeaway is, so there is no inherent glare risk there. So we have a factor between, in my point of view. So, and this is where we can play around a bit in the facade design. Below 1,000 lux, we reduce the glare risk typically, and with the reasonable control, we can have both together. And yeah, multi-user spaces. So
thank you.
That's it.